Hello and welcome. We are set to discuss today three topics: elections in Moldova, the upcoming elections and the outcomes, possible outcomes of those elections in Czech Republic. You can read more about this in our weekly outlook, actually on both accounts. And the third topic, also coming from our weekly outlook, is the upcoming economic security and hard security focused summit in Copenhagen that will take place on Wednesday. My name is Wojciech Przybylski. I'm editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight.
And I'm Stash Kaleta, editor of the Weekly Outlook.
Welcome to the Visegrad Insight podcast.
We bring you global experts on the future of democracy, security, and economy.
The leading voices from Central Europe and on Central Europe.
Hosted by editors of Visegrad Insight.
Powered by Publica Foundation from Warsaw, Poland.
Right, Stash. So against many worries, what we have seen in Moldova, it seems like there is a big relief when we see the results of the elections. Moldova is now nearly certainly going to be a country that has the most ambitious EU enlargement agenda among all candidate countries. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. I mean, for those of us who stayed up last night, Sunday night, to watch the election results come out, it was quite a nice moment. You know, we hear so many difficult stories and news, and here is actually an election going really well, and I think surprisingly well. You know, the ruling pro-EU PAS party led by President Maia Sandu won 50% support in these elections, which were, as you said, absolutely crucial for its bid to join the EU in the coming years. It won 55 seats out of 101, so it's going to have an absolute majority, which is not what pre-election surveys were expecting. And, you know, this is a huge result. In terms of what happens now, it'll be interesting to see, you know, first of all, if the ruling party will still be able to form a functional government, because this is not easy. And also whether Moscow will look to spark, you know, any other protests or methods of disruption now that these results are out. I mean, when you mentioned
let's talk about those, but just like keeping an attention span around the topic that I started. I just wanted to add a few things, because as Moldova will be forming a functional government, I would rather say, and one that has won the mandate on the promise of joining the EU. Now, both Moldova has to deliver, but the EU has to deliver as well. So there needs to be a clarity of purpose in the Brussels bubble and the capitals of the EU to recognize the progress Moldova will be again making, and make the bold steps that enable the future of EU enlargement, also for the other prospective candidates meeting, of course, their merit. Now, this is not taken for granted that it will happen so smoothly, and possibly, and I don't want to point fingers at any single politician, some might have thought that maybe Moldova will be taking off their headache problem if the government is not so strong and the pro-EU enlargement course is not secure. But now, who might have helped that kind of result, and why didn't happen? And there were two parties that were excluded from the race in the last moments before the vote, right? So this is the basis of the pro-Russian protests that might appear, right? And then they will try to undermine the legitimacy of the political direction.
Yeah, so there's this pro-Russian patriotic electoral bloc, which ended up coming second with 24% support. A part of this bloc was the pro-Russian Heart of Moldova party, which is quite an ironic name. But they were blocked from participating because of voter bribery, illegal financing, money laundering, the sort of thing we've heard a lot about in terms of the Russian interference in these elections. And that was just before, that was last week. And also, almost 100 people were arrested over this plot to organize mass riots. So all of this is very much still, potentially on the horizon. And all of this, this razor-thin victory comes amid loads of Russian interference. I mean, the National Security Advisor, Stanislav Siklieru, he said this was even greater than what we saw last year with the referendum and and the presidential election. So, this is not going to continue, and that underlines why the EU now has a great role to play in carrying on this progress that Moldovans clearly want. I mean, just to link this to the Czech election, which I know you want to talk about next, I mean, what we're seeing in Czechia is also lots of interference. I mean, disinformation, we saw a report, has reached historic highs ahead of these elections this weekend, so on the 3rd to 4th of October, which mean that actually disinformation websites now outpace the country's main reliable news outlets, which is quite an incredible statistic. But I know you had some more analysis you wanted to give on what to expect in Czechia.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk about the upcoming Czech elections. We know that the ruling coalition is going away. The ODS is fading in support for quite some time, and the coalition members, the other parties in the Spolu coalition, do not have the stamina to carry through and make a significant result according to the projections, enough to prevent Mr. Babiš from coming back. There is about 10% points difference between his party, ANO party, and Spolu coalition, the ruling coalition. It is also very likely that the coalition will further get their support, and opinion polls might drop after the elections, because ODS, the main party, governing party, might see a split in leadership. Mr. Fiala is likely to be sidelined, and we'll see whether any political communication consistency will be kept on ODS. But what emerges, and that is the big speculation and also the headline of the weekly outlook, is the prospect of a government set up by two main parties. One main party is ANO, but the coalition party that is likely, or we're going to see if they meet and go above the threshold of 5% votes, the Motorists for Themselves party, or the Auto party. This party has been built on number of previous initiatives, political initiatives, including a referendum to exit EU that they failed to deliver. They are also very strong on getting the messages of essentially Eurosceptic messages that want to limit Brussels' intervention in regulations. But somehow in a comic way, because their main motive, or the main logic of political emotions they've been building their political support, has been a move against cyclists, against bike lanes to be built and invested in, and rather they wanted different kind of investment. Probably there is an element of rationale. There is the question of actual need for public transportation investment rather than prioritizing bike lanes all of a sudden. But you can see that from this marginal issue, they are pushing into the Czech politics an agenda that might be closely aligned with Mr. Babiš, especially that both parties are belonging to the new European movement set up by Viktor Orban, together with his Austrian colleagues and French colleagues. But Mr. Babiš also joined the Patriots for Europe group, and Mr. Matejka, František Matejka, who is the leader of the Motorist Party, and a close collaborator on essentially, you could say he's been politically tutored by Václav Klaus, the former president of Czechia, and hardcore Eurosceptic libertarian. He's also a member of the Patriots for Europe, with messages a little bit tilted to AfD, this kind of undermining even the political function of Europe. So what we might see after the weekend is that those two parties will be the leaders of the new coalition setup, and they will be making a hard right turn for Czechia. They might not at first seem so dangerous. They won't be propelled probably by so aggressive cultural policies. as in many other countries where the far right or extreme right went to power. Nevertheless, that will be a significant change and likely departure from the pro-Western and pro-Ukrainian initiatives that have been served in the past years by the government of Mr. Fiala, who, in those strategic dilemmas, perform admirably well. Not all is lost in Czechia. Importantly, Czech security environment is also performing quite well, with their services being deeply embedded in the institutional setup of the government, of the country system, administrative system, helping Czechia protect themselves against many foreign interference in the past. The interesting parts will happen definitely in the region, because there will be bigger alignment, as I said in the beginning, with Viktor Orban, with Mr. Fico, most likely, and a number of initiatives that go against what Poland hoped for Central Europe, and what drove a wedge between the current Warsaw government and the rest of Central Europeans.
Yeah, and while we're talking about those initiatives, and you talked there about security in Ukraine, I mean, one of the other things we're looking to this week is this informal summit in Copenhagen, which will take place on Wednesday. The way we frame this in the Weekly Outlook is that there'll be two elements. There'll be economic security and hard security as well. Maybe I can touch on one of those. Just, last Friday we saw this drone war being discussed between 10 mostly Central and Eastern European member states plus Ukraine. This comes after, drone violations of Poland, of Romania, Russian fighter jets entering Estonia, and then also recently drone incursions across Denmark also. So Copenhagen airport was closed. We hope that it will be open for when the leaders visit on Wednesday. And so, yeah, this drone war being discussed. This will be a key focus, I think. And also, we saw, just to mention, because it was a great speech, last week also the UN Security Council, after the NATO Article 4 was invoked, Radosław Sikorski, the Deputy Prime Minister of Poland, talking about, how willing countries are to shoot down Russian jets if they come over NATO airspace. Don't come here to whine about it. These sorts of things. So I think that will be the hard security context for the summit. I don't know if you wanted to talk more about the economic side.
I agree, and thanks, Stash, for bringing this up. Hopefully, the summit will come undisturbed, contrary to the drone threats spotted over Danish airports in the past. Definitely, a lot of attention will be paid to the hard security that comes with it, but also logistical security, the type of disturbance that comes from the bigger shift in understanding of what we are dealing with globally. We've written about it a few times, how geopolitics is replaced with geoeconomics as a key term that shapes the global order, or disorder, if you prefer. And we have devoted quite a lot of time and interest both in our analysis and giving also space for others to discuss that, because maritime routes, underwater cables, the Baltic Sea is the area of contestation that links the hard security and trade. Number of recent drones attacks are suspected to be launched from vessels, again operated by the fleet controlled by Russia, might be also somehow linked to China. That happened in the past when cables were cut, threatening the economic security of Baltic states and the Nordic states, and also Poland, not to mention Germany. There was a shadow fleet of tankers posing ecological risks and natural catastrophe disasters. Should they were not managed properly. One was drifting to the sides of the coast of the Baltic Sea in Germany. And these topics are closely interlinked, but they also come with the nature of technological advancements, much more important, the ability to produce the war zone relevant technological innovation that Europe is preparing to invest more in. The invitation by President Antonio Costa for the leaders who join the summit in Copenhagen on Wednesday. There is a link of course, a long-term planning and investment, but also urgency is also felt that Europe needs not just to make plans and adjust, to the world to their ideas, but they need to meet the hard reality on the ground that Ukraine industry is currently most adapted and best invested in meeting, and that is not sufficient, of course, but it's still the best we have in Europe in meeting the type of threats that Russia is willing to throw at us.
Right. And I think that's a nice segue into the next part of this podcast episode, because you talk about technologies and the security threat on the eastern flank. And this is exactly what my guest, Raluca Csernatoni, talks about. We spoke on the sidelines of our Europe Future Forum on defense, emerging disruptive technologies, AI. So please listen on after the break.
Yes, and follow us and our Europe Future Forum, also in the links you can find in the materials.
Hi, if you're enjoying this episode, why not subscribe to Visegrad Insight? This gives you access to all our latest content online, as well as to our live and online events. You can use our special promo code for Visegrad Insight podcast listeners to get 35% off. Just go to visegradinsight.eu, choose a yearly subscription, and apply code Visegrad35. And now, back to the podcast.
At the start of September, we saw the historic activation of Article 4 of the NATO treaty after 19 Russian drones violated Poland's airspace. Prime Minister Donald Tusk told a session of parliament in Warsaw that the incident brought Poland the closest it has been to open conflict since World War II. Earlier, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called on Europe to fight for its place in the world during her State of the European Union speech, warning that battle lines for a new world order based on power are being drawn right now. But security and defense today encompass a range of different forms and a range of new technologies, all of which we have to learn to grapple with. To help me explore this developing space is Raluca Csernatoni. Raluca is a research fellow working on the nexus between European defense and emerging disruptive technologies like AI at Carnegie Europe, which is a great line for the bio. She is also a professor of European security and defense, focusing on new technologies at the Brussels School of Governance, the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy, and the University of Brussels. Raluca, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I very much look forward to discussing all things new technologies and defense, and great introduction.
Perfect. Now, I should mention my name is Stash Kaleta. I'm an editor at Visegrad Insight, and we're recording this on the sidelines of our Europe Future Forum, which is a gathering of 200 plus thinkers provided by Visegrad Insight and there's Publica to explore the Polish perspective on key European issues. But anyway, to get into the meat of our conversation, my first question was going to be, can you give a lay of the land or the latest developments in hybrid warfare? You know, we're seeing that Russia continues to wage this successful, unconventional war on Europe. What does this look like? What does hybrid warfare look like?
Excellent question. If I would put my academic hat on, I would say that hybrid warfare is such a complicated concept, and we can think of it from different angles. More specifically or traditionally, it was more about propaganda under the threshold of Article 5, types of operations and influence that would not require guns and tanks to wage that type of warfare. However, this concept has evolved quite a bit. NATO, of course, looks at it from the warfare perspective. The EU looks at the concept from threats perspective. But I would argue nowadays hybrid warfare is such an encompassing term that you can think of it from foreign information manipulation and interference to cyber security and cyber defense to information environment, but on steroids because of the impact of new technologies such as social media platforms or artificial intelligence for that matter. And here I'm thinking of deep fakes, generative AI, everything that, let's say, can power or enable speed and scale when it comes to these threats. All sorts of things, including, for instance, irregular migration that can be weaponized, attacks towards material critical infrastructure. So I have a more broader encompassing approach to this term, but what we can observe now is indeed the fact that hybrid warfare is becoming something that, let's say, the traditional institutions of the state, which are the militaries, the security, intelligence services, what I call the spies and the soldiers, cannot tackle. You need that type of societal resilience and also institutional resilience, the resilience of the information environment to really be able to be prepared. Preparedness is a key word here in Brussels, especially readiness, preparedness, resilience. So from my perspective, nowadays it's high time for EU and NATO member states, respectively, to look into how some of these threats or the threat landscape is expanding. What are the tools of the trade of both malicious state and non-state actors when it comes to their intrusion and influence in the broader cyber-physical domain of the transatlantic or the European space? So for me, the key question here is, what do you do? In what types of policies do you invest? What types of capabilities do you actually prioritize? And of course, the answer for me has always been, and this is more pedantic, it's academic, is this idea, Nordic idea of total defense, whole of society approach or whole of government approach, where you need to have both your population prepared against some of these threats in the long term. You need to invest in critical thinking and digital skills to really, provide that type of resilience, as well as, of course, upskill or even upgrade your security and defense services. Because nowadays, these types of, tools need to be, of course, also handled by the militaries, by the police in terms of internal security, by border managers. So thinking holistically about all of these areas and also providing the necessary tools and programs to upskill, upgrade, invest in capabilities, cyber capabilities. And maybe here, I would also emphasize the need to really foster public-private relations. And one example, or maybe several examples that I can mention here is, of course, emerging and disruptive technologies. The latest advancements in these fields are happening in the commercial tech sector. That expertise is needed to be spinned in the security and defense environment, but also when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber defense.
Well, we can touch on this public-private mixture later, because I think that's really important. But, one of the developments you mentioned, I think one of the key developments is the development of AI. And I was reading a paper that you co-authored called Myth, Power and Agency, Rethinking Artificial Intelligence, Geopolitics and War. I really recommend listeners to read this, but I'll try and quote some of the sentences which are really interesting. One of the ideas is that AI is no longer kind of this fictional thing. So you say it's no longer relegated to the realm of either utopic or dystopic science fiction. It's something that's very much integrated into society, economy, but also warfare. On the other hand, it's also full of paradoxes, and it's surrounded by these narratives that mean it's abstract, distant, and ethically fraught, is a quote from the paper. So I think, it's something we use all the time, but we don't really know what it is sometimes. And especially, I think, in warfare, that's not really a context that we think about artificial intelligence in. So could you say, I think of AI, I think of disinformation, deepfakes. Is that what you think of? What does this look like in warfare?
Great question, and thank you for it. And of course, thank you for the plug. So it's nice to hear back some of the quotes, and also just to mention the excellent contributions as well in this forum article from other colleagues. But yes, you mentioned that AI nowadays is becoming, let's say, very much democratized, especially with the ChatGPTs of this world that we are using, Gen AI and everything else. And of course, when it comes to the commercial sector, we see a really, really important development in this field and very positive ones. Of course, when it comes to security and defense, because security and defense or the military have always been this high politics, national security concerns of national sovereignty, we cannot necessarily, as let's say, the commoners, the lay people, access how some of these technologies are seen strategically on an operational level, or also tactically. However, in the last couple of years, we have seen real-life deployment in the battlefield. And one example is also the lessons learned from the Russian-Ukrainian war. I see AI really supporting the full spectrum of missions, from strategic planning to tactical execution. And in the tactical execution, here we can think of also autonomous drones, AI-enabled technologies. Again, AI deployed in the cyber-physical domain. This is more of pretentious term, but I would say that at the strategic level, we can think of the cyber dimension or the information environment dimension that I mentioned before, but also you mentioned it. It accelerates intelligence processing, intelligence surveillance, reconnaissance. It can also be deployed to analyze open source and not so open source data. Also, commanders can explore multiple courses of action by using AI. And AI is this, again, almost assistant when it comes to decision making. And this can be done more quickly. So decision support is super important. At the operational level, AI powers target recognition, predictive analytics, maintenance, all sorts of things, even the dull and dirty stuff that sometimes we don't want to do, electronic warfare support. So the application are limitless because AI is an enabling technology. It's a dual use technology to be deployed in the civil and military domains. So from this perspective, again, as a strategic enabler, but also as a technological enabler, we can see different forms of application. And just as a disclaimer, military AI is such, again, an empty concept in a way, whatever we put into it, because we can think of all sorts of AI systems and models here. And this is more a question for the engineers, but when it comes to the security and defense domain, we have seen both advanced great powers investing heavily in AI for defense, but also the big tech sector, the technological giants. I know we want to discuss that later on, but they are also very much engaging in public-private relations with the security and military establishments to provide certain services.
Yeah. I mean, we will talk. You call it the AI empire, so we will talk about them in a little bit. But one of the things. I mean, the word that I took from that was limitless, the way that the ways in which AI is changing the battlefield. But another thing that you touched upon in this article that I mentioned was how AI changes the idea of defense, but also through that, things like sovereignty and power. So the quote being, technological giants and militaries co-produce new forms of sovereignty and power across the global stage. What do you mean by that? And what ways is it changing that?
Yes, that's again a great question. I mean, this is also at the core of some of the debates at the moment in thinking of how the battlefields of the future will change under the impact not only of AI, but what I call emerging and disruptive technologies. And these can span from indeed artificial intelligence systems to autonomous robotics to quantum technologies to advanced semiconductor, enhanced human beings in the battlefield, all sorts of applications of some of these new and emerging technologies that can be, of course, leveraged for economic security, for economic progress, but at the same time to be deployed in the security and defense domains. Now, the question is whether these technologies, including AI, will paradigmatically change the nature of warfare. And what do I mean by that? In terms of how we think about strategies, in terms of how we think about the soldier in the battlefield, human-machine relations, but also really raising fundamental questions related to lowering the threshold of warfare. How, for instance, the laws of armed conflict are impacted by the deployment of these technologies. What does it mean to use some of these technologies if you don't know actually how they work? Opening the black box of some of these technologies, the complexity. Other examples, of course, are given by the experts, the cyber experts, that say that we actually want more AI in cyber because the speed and scale of attacks is so high that a human brain cannot really properly provide the necessary defenses. Also, the fact that some of these technologies now are available online with open source. This raises lots of questions of how you design your national strategies. How you do you actually invest in your broader technological and industrial base? Because then if you invest in these AI systems, you can think of how these AI systems can be used for your defense technological and industrial base due to the dual use nature of AI. But when it comes to issues of sovereignty, of course, the question is who gets to control the trajectory of the innovation, research and innovation of these cutting edge technologies? Where are the new centers of power? How is now power defined? Not only technological power, but how technological power is translated into political power. And especially when it comes to controlling the cyber physical, let's say, infrastructure. And by that, I mean that most of our social digital platforms, social media digital platforms, even our military systems rely on this infrastructure. Also, the undersea cables, the satellites that are being used to gather information or to create the pillars of the internet that we have. Who owns that? So who gets to benefit?
Yeah.
Who gets to set the agenda? These are key questions.
Hello again! If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to give us a rating. It really helps boost our platform and invite more guests for you, our listeners.
I promised we would speak about the role of states versus private actors. Let's talk about this. I mean, one of the things, I'll mention the article again, is you claim that talking about this and discussing this is a way of providing reflection and democratic oversight over, these AI deities, quote unquote, that increasingly govern the politics and practices of conflict today. So what is the role of states versus private actors? I mean, the example that comes to me immediately is, Trump, for example, when he's talking about, the administration talks about imposing sanctions on the DSA, but also on preserving these tech companies and their importance. How would you see this state-private relationship?
Mm-hmm. I think this is, again, a key question for the 21st century. We have seen, history is a good teacher for us when it comes to public-private relations, especially in the military domain, but also more broadly in this sense of the empire that I brought in beforehand. We have seen the 19th century with the role of these big companies, East India Company, then in the 20th century with the rise of big corporations, the Fords of this world, and so on. In the Cold War era as well, in the military domain, we have the famous Eisenhower quote of the military-industrial complex. Also, with the rise of ITC, the communication, the internet revolution in the 80s, 90s, the rise of financial institutions that also cross borders, trans-border power, the infrastructure power, some of these companies or multinational companies. But then the question is, especially in defense, if we compare how the state and private actors were engaging beforehand, the weapons manufacturers that were, let's say, the military side of the military-industrial complex, the industrial side, of the military-industrial complex, they were always, let's say, the providers of certain technologies. The state, of course, has been always, in this case, the client. There was a specific relationship negotiated, and some of these companies were really, really answering the security and military needs of a state. Nowadays, when you look at this relationship from what I would call the AI empire, or others have looked at it from a rise of a military commercial industrial complex, or others have called it Silicon Valley goes to war. Professor Eckhard Schwartz, for that matter, shouts out for a contributor for that forum article. These are questions of that really prompt us to rethink the relationship, because before the relationship was a clear one: client, provider, and especially with procurement programs, you would deliver in 20 years the fighter jets and the tanks and so on. Some of these companies are also, like the big tech in the Silicon Valley, are quasi-sovereign companies. And they also actually do not necessarily require for their survival the contracts from the state, as in comparison with the weapons manufacturers or the Lockheed Martins of the Leonardo Thalesis of this world. Mm-hmm. So I think that from this perspective, the relationship already, a power relationship already shifts. Not only that, the question also comes from how some of these companies nowadays, because of the control of the critical digital infrastructure around the world, their data centers, once again, their undersea cables that they are deploying, the data they are gathering under their social media platforms, the type of intelligence that they can provide for the security services is yet again unmatched. Not only that, but the data analytics that they can provide with the AI systems that they can develop. So all of these are already make them as an indispensable nowadays source of sovereignty, a type of sovereignty, hybrid sovereignty, especially because they can provide the cutting edge technologies for data gathering and processing, but also nowadays they more and more provide the hardware as well, the advanced semiconductors, the drones, robots of the future of this world. So the know-how, the fact that they have the compute power, the data, big data to analyze, the cutting edge facilities and labs to do a future oriented type of research. The fact that they also benefit from the trust of great powers, not to mention that. And also they have the best human capital. As I said, I have this expression, they control everything from space to under the sea nowadays. Cloud infrastructure is an example as well. All of these make them as very important players in international relations. Before, states were the main, and still are in a way, let's be honest, the real politics, states are the main actors in international relations. But we see new forms of power emerging, new centers of power as well. There's no surprise that then we see countries sending their tech ambassadors where? To California. New centers of power are being remapped.
This is hugely interesting, really interesting, especially the parallels and contrasts of history. I think we're really, really telling. Okay, well, we're in Warsaw, so I have to ask one more question, because within all of these, risks or dependencies, but also opportunities, there is a chance for Central and Eastern Europe to get involved. And one of the things, I associate Poland and the Baltics, for example, is huge spending on defense, investment in security. But as we're talking about AI and warfare, also huge investment in AI. So we're hearing that recruitment for partners of the Baltic AI Gigafactory has started, a joint initiative between Poland and the Baltics. Do you see those opportunities here for Central and Eastern Europe?
An excellent question. And I think that this is something that needs even more attention nowadays, because Central and Eastern Europe, I'm coming from Romania. We can think about this region, and it has been thought about in these terms as the strategic crossroads that creates, of course, real advantages for all sorts of innovations and resilience, but at the same time, also as a space that has been subjected to different forms of threats. Again, the region faces a demanding threat environment. And I think because of this, there is a tight feedback loop to learn fast and to adapt from actually practice and real experience into policy, and even uploading that type of know-how at the EU or NATO level. So there is, of course, value in looking at the potential, let's say, opportunities here from a tech angle, high-tech perspective, but also the security defense dimension. I would argue that Central and Eastern Europe, and as a disclaimer, I'm not really an expert in this area, but where I see opportunities, let's say, to be pursued, countries here can specialize in affordable, scalable systems that deliver a high impact per euro. And I think that this is something really obvious nowadays, yet again, from lessons learned from the Russian-Ukrainian ongoing war. Here we can think of uncrewed aerial and ground systems, counter drone sensors, unmanned area systems, more kind of the acronyms, again, systems in relation to electronic warfare, battlefield management software. So in this area, firms that combine both what I would call the commercial know-how and expertise with clever engineering can iterate fast and export across Europe and provide solutions, real solutions. So I think that from this perspective, the region, and I'm more drawing from the example also from Romania, has a strong engineering talent. Because in a way, the legacy of the communist era, there are a lot of polytechnical schools. Also, there are, from a financial perspective, competitive costs that might be attractive to investors. And then drawing on my experience in living in Prague, but also in Czech Republic, and also more broadly in Central and Eastern Europe, I think we see also growing startup culture and ecosystem here that can be tapped into, especially from the perspective of new technologies like artificial intelligence, but also cyber is another domain.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Raluca, for that overview, and thank you for coming onto the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
And that's all from this week's episode of the Visegrad Insight podcast, bringing you the leading voices from Central Europe and on Central Europe.
Make sure to subscribe, and we'll be in touch next week.